Hello, and welcome to episode 9 of the Hungry Poets podcast. And in this episode, we're just going to go over 3 poetry books, actually. And the names of the books are Time Spent Waiting by Abu B. Rafique, he's a local poet in my area who actually got his book at a book signing a while ago. And None of these authors will probably be recognizable to people, but I've enjoyed their work. Drift by Brianna Low, who is a poet I saw at the Fall for the Book Festival one year. She did a reading. I even forgot what poem she read. Something about communion wafers. So we're actually going to go over 4 books. And we're not going to be reading any of the copyrighted material. We're just going to do a summary review of these books. So it's a slight change of plans from what I just said. I already said Drift and Time Spent Waiting. So the other 2 would be Eternity Taking Its Time by the Poet Laureate of Canada, a former Poet Laureate named Michael Pleau. I don't even know how to pronounce that. I'll have to figure out how to pronounce it. And I couldn't find anything online about how to pronounce that last name, so I will just leave it at that. But it's Eternity Taking Its Time by Michael Pleau, Pleau, translated by Howard Scott from the original French. And the other one is I Want Post-Rock Music to Be Playing When I Die by Steve Roggenbuck. And he actually wrote inside my book, What If There Are Aliens Who Identify as Rock and Roll Aliens? And this was a chapbook. It was a limited edition I bought from Boost House a while ago. And before we go over these poems, I just want to quickly talk about what I'm doing. I'm trying to promote, starting to try to promote my work. I haven't done much promotion on any of my books, actually. But despite that, I still got some sales from the few book signings I've done. But I'm in the process of writing a new book called Love Poems at the End of Our Lives. And I think we're going to make this a tradition of reading poems from Longfellow at the beginning of each podcast. So let's find it. I have to flip through this book in my hands and find a poem I want to read that I haven't read before. So Henry Wadsworth Longfellow was an American poet who died in 1882 and was born in 1807, so he died at the age of 75. He was famous for some of his poems, such as Paul Revere's Ride. He was the first American to translate Dante Alighieri's Divine Comedy. And he was one of the 5, quote, fireside poets from New England. And that's a quote from Wikipedia. Just gives the basic information about the poet. I mean, there's not really much information about, these guys online. There's some documentaries, like on YouTube, you'll find documentaries on Whitman. You'll find documentaries on John Keats. You'll find even stuff on Longfellow. Longfellow was a very famous poet. He was like a pop culture poet of his day. And the next thing I want to talk about is the themes in Longfellow's writing. He wrote about a variety of topics. He used rhyme a lot, which is something I stay away from. He used blank verse, which is metered but unrhymed lines. Sonnets, which are pretty much like what Shakespeare wrote a lot. There's a specific form, 14 lines, and then a rhyming couplet at the end. And he wrote a variety of themes, which is really emblematic of the American culture. One of the themes was death, which I touched upon in my last episode. Well, I mean the episode before the last one. I want to read the poem by Longfellow called Hawthorne, and this was actually written about Nathaniel Hawthorne's death, who was another writer, and he was a friend of Longfellow. Hawthorne. How beautiful it was that one bright day, in the long week of rain, though all its splendor could not chase away the omnipresent pain. The lovely town was white with apple blooms, and the great elms overhead dark shadows wove on their aerial looms, shot through with golden thread. Across the meadows by the gray old manse, the historic river flowed. I was as one who wanders in a trance, unconscious of his road. The faces of familiar friends seemed strange, their voices I could hear, and yet the words they uttered seemed to change their meaning to my ear. For the one face I looked for was not there. The one low voice was mute. Only an unseen presence filled the air and baffled my pursuit. Now I look back in meadow manse and stream. Dimly my thought defines. I only see a dream within a dream. The hilltop hearsed with pines. I only hear above his place of rest their tender undertone, the infinite longings of a troubled breast, the voices so like his own. There in seclusion and remote from men, the wizard hand lies cold, which at its topmost speed let fall the pen, and left the tale half told. Ah, who shall lift that wand of magic power, and the lost clue regain? The unfinished window in Aladdin's tower, unfinished must remain. And that's one of the most powerful poems I've read from Longfellow. And it too, as well as the other one, as well as The Reaper and the Flowers, even though that was a general one, this one is more about a specific instance of loss and death in someone's life. And the first thing I noticed was the first line, how beautiful it was that one bright day in the long week of rain, though all its pleasant splendor could not chase away the omnipresent pain. And that's like, it's saying how no matter how good things can be, it's nothing will ever take away the loss of someone who's missing from your life. And it goes through all these things about the natural world, but regardless of these beautiful sights he's seeing, I was unconscious who wanders in a trance, unconscious of his road. That means he wasn't paying attention to where he was going. Faces of familiar friends seem strange. And this is a common line a common motif or thing to say, something that's very common. The idea behind the faces of familiar friends seem strange, that's something that a lot of people say when they're feeling grief. Because like you're in a different kind of dream state when you've lost someone. It's like your entire reality has been shaken when you've lost your really good friend. And like he goes to the place where he usually was, but he's not there. And it's just like a dream. And then the next line that caught my attention here was, let's find it. The wizard hand lies cold, which at its topmost speed let fall the pen, and left the tale half told, which refers to Hawthorne's writing and how no one will ever hear the end of the stories that he would have written. And who shall lift the magic power and the lost clue regain, which basically means who can continue writing after Hawthorne has passed away, continue writing his stories. But the answer to that question is in the next sentence. The unfinished window in Aladdin's tower unfinished must remain, because he had this special power to write about things, but no one will ever have that power again to write in the same way that he wrote. And yeah, that's all I wanted to say about Longfellow's poem. I might come back to it at the end of the podcast and just relate it back to the other poems or books we're going over. We're not going to be reading any more poems, but we might do select quotes from the books. And the first one we're going to talk about is I want post-rock music to be playing when I die by Steve Roggenbuck, a poet who I'm very familiar with. So this poem is interspersed with serious notions, um, like really powerful ideas, mixed with like really just silly statements, which is actually a style that I like. It's like not being afraid to be yourself, um, which is something we need more in poetry. Let's see, this book was published by Special Collections Press, University of Cincinnati, College of Design, Architecture, Art, and Planning. And I have edition 71 out of 100. And so he has this one poem about tigers don't care about anything online. That's the name of the poem. And he basically says in the next sentence, which it's like a one sentence poem. Like you can say whatever you want about tigers, but they won't care. That's paraphrasing there, but the thing is, this is something similar to another poet who's deceased named Mark Balmer. But what I like about this poem is it takes something like that seems random, but it has a meaning. It's like I mean, there's a lot of personality in this one little short snippet poem, and yeah, honestly, I'm having a hard time interpreting the poem, but the thing is, you're not afraid to say it. But one thing I will say, it relates back to that theme of appreciation of the natural world. Because it's talking about animals, and like another quote from Steve is like, I wish we could give iPhone 5s to wild animals. This is like a personification of animals, and like saying, why don't they care? Like humans care when you talk about them, but tigers are so like innocent, and they don't care when you say bad things about them. And this is another title. 4,000 sunset pictures from my Snapchat story got backed up onto a hard drive, and now the hard drive is worth $250,000. This is probably my favorite title of a poem I've read in such a long time, because like it's like looking at something that's supposed to be temporary, and like how you can, like Snapchat, you just save this. There's no really saving of the stories. You just post something and then it goes away later on unless someone took a screenshot. But it's like showing how like maybe how we idolize celebrities, but it also shows the value of things once we know they're going to be lost. It's almost like our life, how whenever something is in demand, like, or it's lacking, it's worth more, which is an interesting social commentary. And the thing is, the poem below it doesn't have anything to do pretty much with the actual title. The title's in bold. It's references to Paul Walker, riding bikes, the solar system, and how like there's no limitation on what can happen within the universe, which is another theme from his previous book. Yeah, there's too much to go over in this one poem without actually reading it. But the last thing I want to say is there's a lot of pop culture references, and there's some disgusting things in here, like spitting in someone's mouth and like urinating in the dirt. But he relates it back to the natural world in such a way that shows how even the disgusting parts of our lives have some deep meaning to them, which is one of Walt Whitman's themes, that no particle of an inch of the body is vile, everything is so wonderful. And Roggenbuck was very inspired by Whitman, so that explains it, I think. And then there's lots of poems about appreciation of animals, for example, and jokes, especially when there's a joke about looking up horse pictures online. There's another thing about limiting your number of friends based on how much fiber you take in. There's poems about corn, which is another funny poem about corn. Talks about petting a bunch of animals, like appreciating the physical aspects of different animals. At the end, it describes a cow using the F word, which is not something you expect in a children's poem, which is actually a comedic thing, I think. That was one of my favorite parts of this poem, how you think it's going to be a children's poem, but it's actually not really. And the last thing I want to mention in this book is a poem right in the middle of the book, and it starts with the sentence, "You assholes look, the earth is cute," and it basically, this is a long rant about a 2-page, not really a rant, but like a exposition about how the world is such a miracle that everyone's here, and that you need to continue no matter what you're going through. And this is really my favorite, hands down favorite part of this book, right in the middle of it. And I think we're done talking about this book. But yeah, the themes really, a lot of people are turned off by how like he goes from serious to like really a joking humor, or they don't like the humor. But this is a book that really clicks for me. I mean, I really get, like, I think it's poetry in a truly modern romantic sense, because it's not being afraid to take any chances with it, like taking the art style and just innovating with it, not taking all the risks you can, and it actually pays off, I think. And the next one, Eternity Taking Its Time, by former Poet Laureate of Canada, Michael Pleau. Even though I'm saying the name wrong, but I'm going to read the description. In this poetry collection, Michael Pleau uses simple, moving images that go straight to the heart. He shapes words like a sculptor, with painstaking care to give us moments of pure beauty and flashes of luminous landscape. He evokes the nostalgia of childhood in language and refreshing and bracing as the wind. With this book, Michael invites us to a celebration of the marvelous. In a collection brushed with nostalgia, he gently awakens us to the simple gestures of childhood. Attentive to his worlds, he invites us to go back to the essentials, to natural elements, innocence, and light, in order to magnify the beauty of the universe. And that's Jury's Comment Governor General's Award. I think this book actually won an award. And in this book, you have short little poems. It's about chapbook length, I think, this book. Well, it's actually 50 pages long, 54 pages long. And you have lots of metaphors and images about, like, childhood and the natural world. Everything's about the natural world in this book, but it's very short, very simple language. It's not really... It's amazing how he can use these no like learned references or anything, just like very simple words and very short sentences to get across this strong, powerful, emotional meaning. This is from the introductory poem. Never is the sky slower than in the water of a fountain, where all the blue in the world is caught. And I think that particular line, it really represents how, like, color, it's always the same. Like, the blue from your childhood is the same as the blue from when you're an adult. So it's like all the blue in the world is caught in that single fountain. Is another really powerful sentiment. Like, it's a really compact sentence, but it really has a lot of meaning into those few words. That's what this poet does. He takes few words and packs as much meaning in them as possible, even though some of them don't even make sense. For example, the poem here, at the hour when memories raise their lot of ragged voices, I start again to spell the names of flowers in the visible fire of all things. And this is another poem about memory. That's a main theme. For example, how this doesn't make sense is, well, there's some words here that don't seem to make sense, but actually they don't make sense because it's a metaphor, abusing the English language to get their metaphor across. Love was a little fruit that filled my mouth, and with her eyes the world found its way again. And it seems like a fruit is something sweet, and it fills your mouth, which is like giving you sustenance, and you're intaking it, and that's personified by love. There's more poems about memory, being on a mother's shoulder, and I do realize I'm probably doing a horrible job at reviewing this book because of how hard it is to understand. But sometimes those are the best poems, where like the meaning is sort of concealed by the layer of metaphor, but because they have that strong metaphor, it's it shows off a lot more meaning. And a lot of these poems talk about the good aspects of memories, like First Love Poem, The Son of Old. Those are two titles of poems. It talks about how fond you would, how your fond memories of falling in love for the first time, remembering the sun of the old days. And the sun is something that gives the world heat, so it's like, in summer, it seems to most people is like a happy kind of season, when the sun is usually brightest. And another main theme of this book is like nostalgia. For example, there's a poem named Old Photos, which talks about how the eyes in the photos see nothing but the other side of the world, which is another interesting concept because it makes you think about how, like, the photograph, it's actually just a picture of someone. There's nothing behind the picture. The eyes aren't there anymore. It could be someone who's already deceased. So, like, the eyes, they see nothing but, like, a past that's already gone. And that's all I wanted to say about that book. It's another poetry book that I think about that kind of poetry whenever I think about poetry, the way the metaphors are used, and especially the themes about nostalgia and thinking about the past and memories. It hits all the parts of your heart that you think would be affected by poetry the most when you read those poems. So 2 more books that we're going to touch on briefly. This is Brianna Low, Drift. She's not a well-known poet, but she got this chapbook published by, Gazing Grain Press, which is an inclusive feminist press edited by the alumni of George Mason University MFA program and sponsored by Fall for the Book. We seek to promote socially conscious work by writers of all genres and sexualities. I think I'll just talk about 2 poems in this book. The last poem in this book is called Joan of Arc. It talks about the speakers. I'm not even sure if this relates to personal experience, but it's dangerous to read biography into poetry because poetry is usually something that's fictional, that doesn't have much to do with, that doesn't always reflect perfectly the life of the author. Sometimes they slant it a little bit. But according to this poem, the speaker is cut open by a bunch of doctors who tell her that she will never be a mother. And she relates this to the Saint Joan of Arc, who she read in a book about Joan of Arc that the author of the book said that a bleeding woman, like a woman who has her period, is polluted and is darkened, and they take this as a sign from God when they see that Joan of Arc didn't have the monthly period that women usually have, and she relates this as a sad thing, saying how this is such a sad event that happened to her, but people would look at it, this horrible thing, as something positive, based on misguided religious and or barbaric notions of what it means to be a person. And even though the Bible itself says that, like, children are a gift, and but it's, I mean, all the characters in the Bible who do not have children, they're looked down upon, but they look down upon themselves because they feel like they've been cursed when this happens to them. There's another sentence here that says, when the soldiers removed the clothes from Joan, they were struck by her beauty. I'm paraphrasing here, but they did not rape her, which is seen as, I was disgusted by that sentence because, like, just because someone's naked does not give you the permission to rape them, which is a notion that should go without saying. And there's interesting comments about her own body and how she looks at the scars. And this is the speaker of the poem here. She looks at the scars and wonders about how they look and how easily they are to be seen, especially like in the dark. And the last poem I want to talk about in this book is the title poem called Drift. It's in the middle of the book, the chapbook, on page 5. She says, the first time I heard the word blindness, a nurse is pressing my head against a machine. And then she goes on to describes her fear of going blind. It repeats the words blindness in the narrative like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times in italics, and talks about how she looks at her boyfriend and she sees the darkness drifting forth across his face, and she wonders about like what it would be like to actually be blind, and how you can't spend time looking at the people that you love when you're blind. And the speaker is someone who is desperately fearing going blind and does not want to go blind, and she's reminiscing about what it would be like to lose your eyesight, which is another horrible thing. You have that theme about losing your eyesight, then losing your ability to have children, which would be horrible. But stylistically, these poems, the matter-of-fact way that she says things, the speaker, or the poet, the way the poet puts words together, the matter-of-fact way of the language is something I was really attracted to in this. Can't really describe the way she articulates, but it's just like not angry, not in an angry way or a overly sad way. It's just saying like this is the way it is, and reminiscing about what's going to happen to her. And that's the way the words come together. And here's a poem by Abu Rafique, local poet again. Someone who I think he's a self-published poet. So I want to talk about his book Time Spent Waiting. And in this book, there are a lot of personal. It seems like not that it's a reflection of the author, but since it's dangerous to read biography into poetry, but lots of personal sad like notions about losing someone you love, like a girlfriend or a boyfriend or something. Especially this one poem that I really like. It's called The Greatest Love Affair. I missed you, but I hadn't met you, and it talks about how the relationship goes forward, and then how you know them, and then I stopped missing you, I stopped loving you, and then I stopped knowing you, which is a really sad progression in a poem. And there's an honesty and a vulnerability that's present in these poems that I really like. Let's just go over some of the titles. Have On a Friend's Couch, A Few Quiet Moments, The Pretty Things, Your Personal Spark of Madness. Has a date from 2013, By the Lake. And there's a lot of metaphors in these poems, mostly about past memories of the speaker, not the... And here's another poem. Here's another quote from a poem. This is just a short quote. I fall in love with people who are in the dirt like me, the ones who are a little broken and down. And that really is one of the main themes of the book, how you connect your experiences with others' experiences, and you can identify with them, which is why these poems are so powerful in the first place, because people are going through the same thing will read these poems and connect their past memories with the memories of the speaker in the poems. And that's it for this episode. I think it really shows how poets, usually they're drawing on their own experiences, but they can construct these narratives that people can relate to. And even if it's horrible, like losing your girlfriend or losing your eyesight, not being able to have kids, or even if it's positive, like the memories of this book by Michael Pleau or whatever, about first love, all these memories about the natural world and old photographs, they can become painful as time goes on, because when the time has passed, your memory, even though they're good memories, they start to erode and hurt because you don't have them anymore. But there's still a positive aspect about this. which is that you can share your own personal experiences with others. And that's what keeps the humanity going, is remembering these things. And even if they're painful, just remember what happened in the past. And that's why we write poetry. That's why we write anything, to connect with other people. And that's all I wanted to say for this episode. So thank you. New episode probably in a few weeks. So goodbye.